Welcome to the Black Duck Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Wilkins. I'm excited to have you join me as I speak with a fascinating collection of folks, all of whom have in common that they've made a way for themselves by finding an intersection between thoughtful consideration and the tactile work of getting their hands dirty. This is an examination of intention, capability, and craft. It's where philosophy meets the blue-collar work ethic and where I find real value. Hey folks, welcome back. This week I'm joined by Dr. Devin Pettigrew, originally of Northwest Arkansas and now a resident of the greater Denver area there in Colorado. I was able to stop and talk with Dr. Pettigrew on my way back from BHA Rendezvous. I drove from Missoula through Wyoming and ended up on a Sunday evening, kind of late on a Sunday evening, ended up there at his house. And him and his wife were kind enough to let me hang out for a couple of hours. They gave me a can of mead, my first time drinking that concoction. And I had a really fascinating conversation with Dr. Pettigrew. Devin is a published academic author. He's also a working archeologist there in and around northern Colorado and throughout Wyoming. And his specialization is ancient projectiles, specifically arrows, darts, and atlatls. You might be familiar with atlatls. That's kind of the precursor to the bow and arrow. We'll go into some detail describing it, but this is what a lot of the larger points, projectile points that people are finding, stuff like Clovis points and some of those more famous examples, those large arrowhead, quote unquote, those were really used, thousands of years ago by some of the original inhabitants of North America. And they were putting those on the end of varying lengthed shafts, and they were hurling them at big mammals, mastodons and woolly rhinoceros and deer and elk and bear. And man, this is such a cool conversation. I mean, like if you're a person who grew up watching the Discovery Channel, or like what the Discovery Channel used to be like, or any of those National Geographic documentaries, it kind of felt like I was in a real life version of that, but also kind of big questions and answers and things to think about as far as the cyclical nature of humanity and the fact that something that was so intimately used by a person thousands of years ago is kind of accessible to us and can really just be found by walking around and being observant or just happenstance. Devin's doing a bunch of really cool research involving demystifying some of these projectile tools and figuring out what they can tell us about the past and the present. And this is really just a super interesting and fascinating conversation. I talk about in the beginning, the intro to this podcast, the connection from thoughtful consideration and the tactile work of getting your hands dirty. And that's so applicable to this conversation and this subject matter, both, as how they're being found, how a lot of this evidence is being found, in the dirt, but also to think about how these things were made and what they have to tell us about kind of this continuum of humanity. So please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Devin Pettigrew. Hey folks, I am in Colorado today, Denver-ish area, and this is a cool podcast. I'm looking forward to it. I've been driving all day. I just left the rendezvous up in Missoula, and so I've been driving since about 6 this morning, and my guest this week was kind enough to allow me to stop by his home after dark here. I've probably got one more long drive ahead of me before I get back to Arkansas. But I'm here in the home of one Dr. Devin Pettigrew, who is an archaeologist originally from Northwest Arkansas and now based in and working out of northern Colorado. And Devin, thank you so much for letting me stop by your house at such an odd hour.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a pleasure.
So Yeah, let's just like real quick, let's kind of establish who you are, what you're doing. You're doing super interesting work, like we were just talking about before. You're doing a ton of interesting work about maybe some of the origins of ballistics, which obviously intersects a lot with hunting. But even more interesting to me is maybe kind of some of the human origin type stuff. But But, I'm sitting here right behind you. I'm looking at all these projectile points, what would commonly be called like found arrowheads that you were telling me your father found many years ago in his childhood. So, yeah, man, just, I guess what might be cool is maybe just define for folks exactly what an archaeologist is. Because I bet there's a lot of people that have maybe a confusion between archaeology, anthropology, paleontology.
Yeah, a lot of people confuse us with paleontologists. The latter, of course, dig up dinosaurs, and we are dealing with ancient people. So archaeology in the United States is a subdivision of anthropology, which is the study of human beings. And we're simply studying people that have been here in the past and are no longer with us. And mostly we're looking at things underground, right? Because people left sites behind, they left artifacts behind, and in some cases we've got things above ground, architecture, that sort of thing. But mostly we're dealing with trying to understand the archaeological record, which is primarily on top of or underneath the earth, and it's all about ancient people.
So, and when you say ancient, like, what's the range? Is Civil War research, is that archaeology or?
That is archaeology, yeah. And I've actually done some really cool archaeology on Civil War battlefields. I curated a collection from Pea Ridge battlefield in northwest Arkansas and did a survey of Prairie Grove battlefield, also in northwest Arkansas, and found some really cool things. So that's definitely part of the archaeological record. Now it's kind of, because we have to have some kind of benchmark as to what we deal with, we look at anything that's 50 years old or older. Okay. So it's a hugely broad range. Doesn't necessarily mean that if we find something that's 50 years old that we're going to spend, a lot of time documenting or excavating it. We start to take note of things at that cutoff. And then it goes back. I mean, we can do archaeological analysis of like ancient technology that early hominins used, 1.5 million years ago. So it's a hugely broad range, and it doesn't necessarily stop before our species came into being.
And so we were talking, like when I first got here, we were talking about how your area of interest is in ancient ballistics. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, I'm looking at these projectile points that obviously were interesting to your father when he was growing up.
As they are to a lot of people.
Sure. I would assume that has some influence on what you're doing now.
Oh,
also,
yeah. Absolutely.
I know that you grew up hunting. Did you know that I went to college with your brother?
I did not. You went to Hendrix?
Yeah, I didn't know that until very recently. I guess he's like a year older than me.
Okay.
We didn't know each other, but we went to college together. Yeah. And I bring that up because I know Ryan from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And so obviously hunting's super important to him and how he's raising his boys. I see you've got antlers and...
Yep, got some antlers.
Flies over here. So you're obviously still very much involved in those outdoor pursuits. So, I mean, is this just, not just, but is your research a way to combine all these different lifelong interests?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got really into hunting, obviously, and Dad and also my mom were really interested in ancient stuff. Dad had collected all of these projectile points from his homestead around Kings River, and he was just really fascinated by the past, and so that got me really involved in that. And then I remember in Boy Scouts, he actually taught Indian lore, and he had this little pamphlet that he had picked up somewhere on vacation. I've actually got it here on my bookshelf. And it's just a quick description of how you make an atlatl and a sling. And I saw that at Indian lore. I guess for some reason I'd never seen that book before, but he brought it out for that. And I think about a year went by, and I got to thinking about that, and I thought, I want to make a sling. So I went and dug up that book, flipped through it, and then found the atlatl. And that was when I was probably about 14, 15 years old. Started making this stuff, tinkering with it, researching online. And back then, there wasn't a whole lot of information to find, but there was the World Atlatl Association had an online presence. And so I was reading through their forums, and I just got completely, enamored with this thing.
All right, let's freeze frame for 1 second. I want to ask you two questions. The correct pronunciation of this, because it's ATL.
Yeah.
So is it atlatl? Are you saying like the same little short thing twice really fast, or?
You can say atlatl or you can say atlatl, and both of those are incorrect. Technically speaking, it's a nahuatl or nahuatl term, and that's the language of the Aztecs and other Nahuatl speakers in Mesoamerica. So the correct pronunciation is something like atlat.
Okay.
Yeah, which is hard for a lot of people to say. So we have anglicized it, and I think the most common way for modern Americans to say it is atlatl.
All right. That's the second time in like a few weeks that the Aztec language has come up on this podcast.
Interesting.
Hank Shaw, 2 of his cats have Aztec names.
Oh, well, we've incorporated some Nahuatl words into our modern English. So maybe one of the most familiar to your listeners is coyote.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that final TL is a t sound, which you make by, it's kind of like how you say a T, but instead of using the tip of your tongue, you're using the sides of your tongue.
And then that got kind of bastardized and turned into coyote.
Yeah, which coyote is pretty close to coyote.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so atlatl, atlat.
I'm going to say atlatl.
Okay.
And then I'm looking at like an atlatl dart right now, and what would you call this part of it?
So this
like
is
the lever part, or?
This is the actual atlatl.
Okay.
The atlatl, yeah, itself.
And then there's a dart.
Yeah, and then there's a dart, yaumit.
Can you try like to describe, someone that can't see this, to describe what it looks like?
It's, imagine you have a javelin and you have an arrow, and you put them together. Now you have a big arrow. It's flexible.
Yeah, incredibly so.
Yeah, it's quite flexible, and it's got to flex because when you launch something, you're not just pushing it from the back in a perfectly straight line, right? Perfectly in a straight line with its trajectory. You're actually making an arcing motion because you're throwing something. Mm-hmm. So what the atlatl does is it basically lengthens your arm. What people in biomechanics talk about is the kinetic chain, where as you step forward, you're kind of cocking back, your joints are cocking back, and then as you throw, you're putting momentum into those additional segments down the line. So from your full body, your torso, to your shoulder, to your forearm, to your wrist, and then you have an additional segment here. So it adds leverage. And the atlatl it's roughly 2 feet long. They vary in length quite a bit. It has a little bitty knob at the end here, a little hook or spur. In some cases, that's actually a socket, but for the most part, it's a spur that connects with a little bitty indention in the back of the dart.
Okay.
So you have the spur, fits up against the indention there, and the dart is fletched like an arrow. So you got some fletchings on there, and then it rests across your hand here. So in your ready position, you're holding it back like this with the dart pointed at the target, right? It's not like raising up or anything. Dart's pointed at the target. You're looking down at, you got your arm kind of cocked back, ready to go. And when you throw, you just step forward and just launch it straight at the target. And it flexes to compensate for that arcing throwing motion and maintain a straight trajectory.
And then this dart is, what is that, 5 feet long?
Yeah, this one's about 5 feet. They range from 5 to 10 feet.
Really? 10 feet?
There's a huge amount of variability in the weapon. Yeah, that's one thing that people don't think about or they forget, including archaeologists even. We tend to kind of essentialize this and say, a bow is this, an atlatl is this, a spear is this. But there's a huge amount of variation in all those weapons, and the atlatl is no exception. This one is probably on the lighter end of the spectrum, but it comes off the atlatl traveling about 25 meters a second. We'd have to do conversion on that to figure out. I deal with meters a second, unfortunately, what FPS that is. But that's enough velocity for this dart to kill a deer. Yeah, so this thing could punch right through a deer. And then if you were hunting something bigger, you'd scale up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then was this was used, so obviously if it's an Aztec word, I'm guessing it was used in what's now Mexico or perhaps Central America, and then across North America as well, or across
South
the
America,
world?
North America, Asia, Australia, Europe, the Arctic. We don't have good evidence for it in Africa. Never seen any evidence there.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a couple possibilities. One is that it was used there and we just aren't seeing it. Because, projectile points on the board back here, those could belong to anything. The big ones could have gone on really big arrows. You can make, and people have made very large arrows. But for the most part, we think that the vast majority of what people call arrowheads in North America belong to atlatl darts, or they were knives or something like that. I lost my train of thought.
We were talking about why we're not finding evidence of it in Africa.
Oh, okay, right. Historically, however, in Africa, people were very good at hunting with spears, hand-thrown javelins. And in fact, in some cases, ethnographically, as recently as the 1970s, they had remarkably high success rates hunting big ungulates with spears. Wildebeest, zebra, buffalo.
So like the Maasai warriors, they would be like the tall, skinny guys with like the long braids that do a lot of jumping you might see on TV. Like they're known as like hunting lions with spears, right?
Yeah, and rarely, look up pictures of. Okay, so nowadays the Maasai have firearms, but look up pictures of traditional Maasai, and it's rare to see those folks without spears. They grew up from a young age with spears, and so they were very good with them. And in southern Africa, the San also hunted with spears. They also hunted with small bows and arrows, poisoned arrows, and it looks archaeologically like their basic hunting kit dates back 70,000 years, something like that. So why isn't the atlatl in Africa? It may just be that there's a long tradition, of the kinds of weapons that we see ethnographically that they were very effective with.
Yeah, 70,000 years of something working is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's come back over to this side of the world. And I'm trying to figure out how to go into this conversation. I'll just start asking some questions. So when we were looking at some of these points earlier before we started recording, and I was asking you about some of the time frames, right? So you're talking, if I can remember this correct, you're talking about Dalton points, Searcy points. There was another creek.
Snyder's, Williams. Langtree, Calf Creek.
Calf Creek, yeah. And you're explaining to me that these are all diagnostic in a way that you can say they're made in this way, and so that's where the name's coming from, right? Like Dalton points share these similar characteristics, and so on.
Yeah.
And then I was asking you about, like, what are we talking about as far as how long ago? And one of them you referenced, you said, maybe 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Are most of the projectile points that people would be finding in North America, are those going to be like in that range or older, or are we talking about, more recent examples of indigeneity, like, the last couple hundred years?
Yeah. The vast majority of points that people pick up are archaic. So, 2,000 years back to roughly about 8,000 years. The date range varies depending on the specific region you're in, which is frustrating, but that's archaeology. But, there's just this very long time span over which people are practicing this hunter-forager life way. And they're using, as their primary piercing projectile weapon for hunting and combat, is the atlat. They probably had other weapons as well. In some cases, we know that they had boomerangs, straight flying boomerangs, which is
here in North America.
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples up there. Those were used for hunting and combat. People don't think about a boomerang as being a deadly weapon, but that's how they started out, was as deadly thrown weapons they're just killer gyroscopes that fly a long way, and they hit hard with, right on this sharpened edge of the wing. And so you can kill everything. You can kill rabbits with them, and they used them for combat. And they had other tools as well. But for the most part, what we see left behind, what they actually left behind that we can see now, are stone projectile points. So that's for the most part what people are picking up. In some cases, though, they're finding older stuff, and in some cases they're finding newer stuff. But when you get back into the paleo projectile points, 9,000 years and older, there weren't as many people then. The populations were smaller, so they left less stuff behind, which makes it hard for us to know, specifically when people first arrived. If they came into an area and they had very small numbers, they weren't leaving a lot of stuff behind. So the chances that archaeologists are actually going to find it are lower. And then later in time, the bow and arrow came in, starting in we can think of the continental United States, probably about 3,000 years ago, the bow and arrow arrives. And then in most places, it's prominent. People are using it around 2,000 years ago. And then a lot of places, there's about 1,000 years, give or take, or more, of overlap between the two weapon technologies, between the bow and arrow and the atlatl and dart. So just in terms of time, how long people have been on the landscape, leaving things behind, just chances are you're going to be finding mostly archaic type or later atlatl dart points.
And then when the bow came into being after that overlap period, did it just pretty much usurp the atlatl?
No, not really. A lot of people think that, and that's our starting assumption, but I think that we have a lot of bias that we bring to the table there because we're very focused on technology. One of the problems I'm dealing with now is that in my research is that archaeologists they've not only assumed this kind of technological deterministic perspective for humans. When a better technology comes along, everybody's going to use it. That's a technological deterministic assumption. You forget that people are people. We do weird things, or we hang on to traditions, or we actually, in some cases, may be incredibly skilled with an earlier weapon technology, and we see a lot of examples of earlier weapon technologies like spears, javelins, slings persisting up to the present day. But we also forget that the animals that we hunt they're also responsive. They change their behavior depending on how they're being hunted, right? And we see this with elk, for example, elk and wolves. When you introduce wolves into an area, the elk now have to figure out what this new creature is, like how do I deal with this? And they develop new behaviors. They pass on those behaviors to offspring, and they become more challenging for wolves to hunt them. So, but for animals to start to develop those new behaviors, there has to be enough of a presence of predators on the landscape. So animals become more challenging to hunt, and modern hunters deal with this problem all the time. As our numbers increase, as we become denser, it's harder to find animals. Out west, it's very clear that elk and mule deer become more challenging to hunt as hunter densities increase. So it's really quite interesting that the bow and arrow comes in to North America and starts being adopted more heavily at a time period when people are also adopting agriculture and becoming more sedentary, and their numbers are going up, and they're hunting in more localized areas. So weapon technologies, I think we have to get by our assumption that one thing is better, and people are instantly going to latch onto it, because there's a lot of different ethnographic accounts where that's not the case.
And I mean, the atlatl this wasn't just a hunting weapon, right? Like, this was an instrument of war, wasn't it?
That's right. So our first reintroduction to it as Europeans, when the Spanish arrived in Mexico, was as projectiles that were being launched at them. It was a very common instrument of war in Mesoamerica. And there's a theory, or I guess it's a what do you call it? A public myth. What is the term I'm looking for?
A public, like an old wives' tale.
Yeah. No, that's not quite it. But we'll call it.
We'll kill ourselves trying to remember now.
We'll call it an old wives' tale. That the atlatl dart could pierce Spanish armor, and there's all these depictions of Spaniards in Mesoamerica wearing like full suits of armor. But those are probably, for the most part, those codices, indigenous books, writing, and a lot of times it included pictures, were made well after the conquest, because their pre-conquest books were burned, unfortunately, by the Jesuits. But then the Spaniards realized, actually, native writing is extremely useful to us, because they're very good at documenting things. These are their land claims. Communities use these codices to draw out their territory, and they use them to in accounting, how much tribute, and so they restarted this codice tradition after the conquest, and they were seeing these pageants, Spanish pageants, in which actors were wearing like medieval type armor, like full suits of armor. Actually, during the conquest, though, most of the conquistadors were wearing native armor, native gambeson, like a quilted cotton, heavy fabric armor. And that wasn't at all strange to them, because they came from, in Europe, where gambeson was very common, heavy fabric armor. So they acquired it from Mesoamericans. And that's probably what they're talking about for the most part when atlatls could pierce their armor. They're constantly referring to their armor. It's their native, the quilted cotton armor that they acquired from Mesoamericans.
And so that would be, what you're describing would be like I mean, would it literally be like quilted cotton, like look like a quilt kind
Yeah,
of?
I mean, you just think about like Carhartts, put a bunch of Carhartt fabric together, like really thick canvas. That's gambeson armor. It's just a thick, and there's a lot of different ways to make it. But so it's just a really heavy fabric, thick fabric armor that oftentimes was sewn together in kind of a quilted like.
And it's, I would imagine that it's better for protecting you from like a slashing motion than from a puncturing type.
Yeah. If you combine it with chainmail over the top, you get good protection from slashing, and it gives you some padding.
Sure.
But the gambeson armor is much better than chainmail at protecting you from piercing from arrows or crossbow bolts, or in this case, atlatl darts.
All right, so you alluded to it there, but let's talk a little bit about your research. And we were talking about you being up in Missoula and doing this bison research and stuff, and like what's kind of really separating you and what you're looking at from, a lot of the ancient ballistic research that's been done previously.
Yeah, so I'm looking mainly at terminal ballistics, and the field of ballistics deals with three main types of ballistics. Internal ballistics being the launching or the firing of the projectile, external ballistics being its flight through atmosphere, and then terminal ballistics being impacting and penetrating a target in the case that it does penetrate. So my research has focused mainly on terminal ballistics. I'm looking at both arrows and atlatl darts, using a variety of stone points that have been knapped by modern knappers, representing ancient forms of all different materials. And I've used them on the carcasses of animals, fresh animal carcasses. So what we do is we get an animal from a rancher. The rancher puts the animal down for us in the way that they always do, and humanely, and then we immediately set out testing these ancient weapons on them.
What kind of animals are you talking about?
So we've tested a hog, 2 goats, and a bison.
Okay.
Yeah, and and a cow that had died. My very first projectile experiment was my my undergraduate thesis was on a cow that had died the night before. So from the beginning, I wanted to test a bison, and I finally got to do that last year. So mainly what I'm looking at is the efficacy of the weapon, like how, what makes the weapon effective. But because of the way we set up the experiment, we use high-speed cameras, one camera observing the flight and impact of the projectile, the other camera observing from the side, and the darts have markings on them, so we can actually use the camera observing from the side to calculate the velocity.
Yeah, it's like, did you ever watch Mythbusters?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that high-speed, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and terminal ballisticians, even in firearm studies, use high-speed cameras in this regard all the time. But actually what they can't do, which I figured out I can do, is look at the deceleration of the dart as it penetrates, or of the arrow as it penetrates. And if you look at that closely, you can track the force of resistance that the projectile armature meets as it's cutting through, or the force of drag on the trailing shaft. So there's a huge range of variables, and I've done an extensive statistical analysis to try and determine, what's making these weapons effective.
What makes them effective?
Well, so unsurprisingly, kinetic energy and momentum play a huge role. And also unsurprisingly, the sharpness of the armature, the stone armature, is extremely important. When they first contact the carcass, they hit skin, and skin is the most resistive soft tissue on the body. So first the armature has to deal with the skin layer. If it gets through that, it may have to deal with some muscle tissue directly underneath, and then cutting through the internal organs, of course, they're far less resistive.
So, I imagine the amount of hair on the critter too makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think I do think that we overplay that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen, the goats were like really, the white goat was really fuzzy, and I didn't notice any difference in. So I do imagine that there's something there, like if you have really coarse, thick hair, but I think that we overplay it a little bit. The main thing is the thickness of the hide,
mm-hmm.
how much energy, how sharp, and of course the projectile has to be well designed. It has to be pretty stiff up front, so it's not bending too much as it penetrates, and it has to hit with a straight trajectory.
That actually makes me think about maybe we should, because I'm sitting here looking at these, and I've seen some of these or points like these before, but there might be someone listening who doesn't know what napping means, right? And so,
yeah,
as I understand it, the result is something that's like a serrated blade. It's not, which is going to have a different kind of effect than just like a modern super sharp laser sharp piece of steel.
Yeah, exactly. So what's interesting that I discovered that I hadn't really thought about before is that the main thing that set the armatures apart, was the material that they were napped from. So when you're napping something, you have stone that's going to break in a predictable fashion. And if you've ever seen or done yourself shot a window with a BB gun as a kid, you will see this cone form where that BB hits the glass. That's called the Hertzian cone. So when we nap, we're using the way that it breaks following that Hertzian cone to understand the material to break it in a controlled fashion. So when we're napping, we're basically breaking rock a whole bunch of times, flaking off, driving off flakes. Some are quite large, and then we finish it off usually with a pressure flaking method where you've got like a sharp piece of antler that is pressed up against the edge, and then you're levering off smaller flakes.
And so that's how you're getting all the like serrations on the very end. So you're using like a larger rock or something to break this into the general shape, and then you start refining it with that smaller point. Yeah.
So what it produces is a fractured edge. It's going to be as sharp as the material is when it fractures. You're not going to take it and grind it like you do, basically with a knife. You're grinding it on stone to sharpen it. Here you're just fracturing it, and you're using that natural fractured edge.
And so, so this one that I'm holding, is this like a shaft that would fit into a longer one?
Yeah.
And come apart?
That would fit into the main shaft, like a piece of river cane.
Okay.
So this one has a foreshaft in it that we can pull out. See, and it's the same thing.
Okay, yeah.
So the one you're holding there that I handed you first is a pretty close replica of ones that were found in the Ozarks under rock shelters, mostly in the early part of the 1900s. That one from All Red Shelter, which is now under Beaver Lake. But
what would this material be? Like, what rock is this?
That is Burlington Chert, which outcrops there in the Ozarks. So you're generally going to be working some kind of chert, which is a sedimentary rock. It's where it forms in limestone, where silica precipitates and hardens, crystallizes. But you can also work various types of volcanic materials, mudstones. There's all sorts of different things that you can nap. Obsidian is volcanic, of course.
Is that like the sharpest stuff you can do it out of?
Probably, yeah. It's extremely sharp. Although one thing that I'm realizing is that people haven't really been looking at sharpness that much. And so this is kind of silly, but we've overlooked this really important feature of stone armatures, how sharp they were. So I just had an napper telling me recently that this type of agate, pigeon's blood agate from this is from like the Southwest, he felt was sharper than obsidian. He had received horrible cuts from it. And he sent me a little pigeon blood agate arrow point that's absolutely gorgeous. But obsidian, yes, it's extremely sharp. The other problem with it, though, or the other thing about it that's problematic, is that it's also pretty fragile. So there's kind of like a balancing act, where you're going for something that's sharp, that's nappable, but is also durable. Because these armatures aren't just having to cut through skin, they're also having to deal with bone in the case that they contact bone, and they need to survive that event and get through the outer part of the animal and go on and cut a path and size a wound.
Were these designed to be, and I think I know the answer to this because we were talking about these pieces that have been reworked, but were they designed to be one-time use, or they wanted to get as much use as possible out of it?
That's a really good question. Archaeologists will be, we could get a few archaeologists in the room that would argue with each other about this. It does look like people were often trying to retrieve and resharpen, rework armatures if they could, especially early on. Although we have really overplayed that for Paleo-Indians. We think these people were like optimal foragers. They were going out on the landscape with this like highly refined toolkit that not only functioned for them, but that was durable, that they could keep on reusing over and over again. And they were actually discarding points at a rate about the same as later archaic people were. So they were definitely retrieving points and reworking them. And frequently when people find quote unquote arrowheads, they're finding points they're either broken from impacting something or they were reworked significantly. It's going to be pretty rare that you're going to find something that was like it was when it was first manufactured.
So yeah, you're getting the least good stuff. You're getting the broken stuff or the stuff they couldn't find again.
Yeah. We're picking up garbage. It's kind of like I frequently find shell casings when I'm out hunting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you were to pick those things up and come back and make a design on your wall.
6,000 years later.
Yeah, with 30-06 shell casings. Those are left behind for a reason. And it's frequently because they were dull, they were broken, or maybe they were lost inside the viscera, the organs of some animal that was butchered. Various reasons, but for the most part, they're impacted, they're reworked, they're used up.
So, I'd like to delve a bit deeper now, because I think we've got a little bit of a basis for understanding this technology and understanding your research into it. I'm interested, in delving a bit more into why is this worth studying? We have these weapons that have in so many ways surpassed the efficacy of these ancient tools. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about picking up garbage, like the leftover stuff, and like, why are you dedicating your life to this? What is the relevance for people today?
Yeah, well, the relevance for people today, of course, it's the general relevance of studying anthropology. it's extremely worthwhile to study human beings. As human beings moving forward, if we want to, go on and have successful civilizations in the future, we need to understand ourselves. And part of that is understanding our past. We can use archaeology in ways that other research, history, anthropology doesn't allow us to study people, because it reveals things that there's just no other way to reveal it. For instance, if you go out on a historic battlefield and you very carefully study the material on that battlefield, it can give you a view of that battle that is remarkably different than historical documents, or that in some cases supports historical documents. So when we study ancient people, ancient hunter-gatherers, for me, I'm trying to understand not only what were their lives like, what was it like to live back then, to live on planet Earth before humans were incredibly dense, before we had these large permanent structures, when we made all of our tools by hand, when we acquired all of our food by hand. Seeing that is extremely important. But I also want to know, how did these people interact with the world around them, the plants and animals? What were their relationships like with the prey that they hunted? And how does that compare to our relationships now with the prey that we hunt now? And in fact, it was remarkably different. If we look at what's the Great Plains look like now versus what it looked like 200 years ago or 300 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Now it looks incredibly different. So our relationship with the world around us, with wild animals, is now completely different. And I think people need to have a better perspective on that. A lot of people, don't like hunting, right?
Sure.
But now, how do they acquire their food? I mean, the Great Plains now supports humans. It doesn't support humans and the animals that they hunted. It supports humans and domesticated crops and domesticated animals. So, going back to what I was saying earlier about animals changing their behavior in terms of how they're being hunted. If you introduce a new predator on the landscape, prey animals are going to change their behavior. That's something for hunters to think about, because in the deep past, when this weapon, the atlatl, and also the spear, like the San used historically, when those were the weapons that people were hunting with, densities of humans on the landscape was far lower, right? And we know from wildlife management studies that as hunter densities go up, hunting becomes more challenging. And if you look at the San case, historically, they had a very low density, but they were very good with hunting with spears, hunting big ungulates with spears from blinds. They were getting up to 80% success rate per day.
Well, they were building blinds and hunting out of blinds?
Yeah, platform stands up in trees, along rivers, blinds near watering holes. They were hunting animals in all sorts of ways. They were also running animals, digging animals out of burrows, all sorts of ways. But they're hunting big ungulates, wildebeest, zebra, kudu, and they have a very high success rate. And what the anthropologists say in account after account is that using the spear, they're hitting the animal and the animal's dropping on the spot or very near to where it was being hit, because, it's being hit with a spear. It's got a big, sharp head on it. And they were, driving those things through the sides of buffalo. So they were extremely good with their weapons. And I think if you're just looking at efficacy, I'm no doubt in my mind that you could pull random examples, modern hunters in Colorado, San hunters when they were being documented in the 70s, and you would come away with a completely different perspective on, what weapon efficacy looks like and how you attribute it to these different weapons. So, studying this kind of thing, ancient hunters, for me, it's incredibly eye-opening in ways that people don't expect or don't realize, and that's the purpose. That's the purpose of this research is to reveal the unexpected, and show us where our data has gone wrong, or what we've got wrong, or what we just don't know.
I'm going to ask you a question now that, like I told you before, I'm not trying to play gotcha on any of this stuff, but this is something that has been coming up as of late, and we just briefly kind of touched on it before we started recording. But you were showing me some projectile points, and you said, this is stuff that I picked up as a kid before I was an archaeologist.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And I said, you wouldn't pick up a point now? And you said, no, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so there's there's kind of in the public, I hazard to call it the public intelligentsia, but just like, there's been a lot of discussion. Yeah. Recently on internet forums and some podcasts and stuff about, whether it's, I guess we're dealing with a matter of morality largely, but if it's right to pick up a projectile point when you come across it. Now, I'm not talking about the legal side of it, because if you come across that on like BLM land or some sort of publicly managed land, in most of the time legally you're supposed to leave that there. But if you own a piece of property and you come across this stuff, it's kind of up to the person who owns the land. So why are you not doing that as an archaeologist?
As an archaeologist, you kind of take this unsaid oath. It's about data, and it's about understanding ancient people. So, for instance, I was telling you before we started about what I'm doing now, which is cultural resources management. We go out and do surveys if there's any project on public land, vegetation management, anything like that. We need to do a survey and make sure that there's no important cultural resources there that are going to be disturbed, and so we go out and document things. Nowadays, even if you go way down some dirt road on BLM into the backwoods of Colorado, it's often the case that you're surveying the landscape and you're finding archaeology, but you're not seeing the things that should be there, that are these pretty diagnostic points that people like to pick up. And lo and behold, you will find some modern garbage around too. And it looks like what we know has happened. In most cases, those sites have been picked over already. Out west, a lot of sites are on the surface. They're not very deeply buried, so the artifacts will be right there on the surface, and people like to come along and collect things.
Why is it that they stay on the surface out west?
It's about deposition. If you're in a river valley, you have sedimentation. It's coming down the river and or off the sides of the hills. The river sometimes floods and deposits sediment. You'll have sedimentation in the river valley. Up top, it's washing. So you've got the reverse process up top. So it just depends on like the processes of erosion and so on and so forth, where you're at, the specific spot that you're at on the Earth's surface. Out west, a lot of places are getting eroded by wind and water just off the surface, and you actually don't have sedimentation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, people pick these things up, what we call diagnostic artifacts, meaning that they have some attributes that make them distinguishable. that we can say, this is a particular type of point, like a Calf Creek point, that's about 5,000 years old, give or take. So if those are there, we can walk the landscape, see the sites, and say, here's a Calf Creek site over here. This one has Dalton points on it, but it also has a later woodland component. So just walking the landscape, you can see these things. And just there, I was actually referencing Arkansas point types, not things you would find in Colorado. So it's incredibly frustrating for archaeologists to go out on the landscape, document these sites that have never been documented before, but there's a preservation bias already that we're dealing with, in that most of the cultural material that was left behind thousands of years ago has not survived. Most things were made of wood or plant fibers, those or leather. That's all gone. But we should be seeing these different types of tools that indicate different kinds of activities, types of tools that indicate cultural periods, that we can go back, plug that all into a big map, and have a database that we can draw from and say, the Dalton people had a population of roughly thus and so because this was their where their sites were distributed. This is how big they were. They were using different parts of the landscape. Maybe if we look really closely, we could even infer something about the time of year that they were there. And we can get all sorts of information about ancient people, how they were moving on the landscape, what their lives were like. And now, for people to walk around and occasionally pick things up, that's one thing. But for people to go out and deliberately target archaeological sites, pick up artifacts, and then not record anything about the locations of those artifacts, nothing. Just add those. They eventually get put in like a shoebox and put in their attic, or their kids inherit and have no clue what to do with a bunch of old broken rocks. That's really frustrating to archaeologists. However, I have boards of my dad's artifacts that he picked up as a kid. They're meaningful to me because they remind me of him. I have no use for those personally, other than seeing them, but I can see those in a museum, or I can look up pictures of them online. And nowadays, I can make those, or friends of mine who nap better than me can make those. I can make the atlatls and darts. I can half them the way that they were. I can throw them at things and see how they break. We've recreated the technology. So for me, I've seen so many of these things now experimentally that I just have no desire to own, something like that. To me, it's the informational value. That's what's important.
Why do you? This is. I don't know that this is beyond archaeology, because this would definitely fall into the study of humans. Why do you think that so many people have the inclination when they see that on the ground that they want to pick it up and put it in their hands and hold on to it,
and then take it back? I think they're for one thing, they're diagnostic. As we were saying. That indicates something to archaeologists. It also is a characteristic. You can look at that and say that was deliberately made. A lot of time went into that, and it takes a very particular shape that the craftsman was going for, and that means something, and it must have meant something deeply to them. People are fascinated by this stuff, and that's great. That's what we want. Part of it also has to do with our culture, how we view ancient artifacts, and archaeologists have done this. I mean, we started the trend of going out and collecting treasure. You can watch Indiana Jones and get a sense of what early archaeology was actually like, collecting treasure and putting it in museums, and that the public took that up as well. So people aren't to blame for this stuff, I think, unless they just say, screw you, I'm going to go out on public land and pick over a bunch of archaeological sites.
What do you Do you have much contact with your work with I mean, like especially out west here, like folks from any of the tribes or reservations?
Yeah, I've got a couple of close contacts with the Pawnee tribe. Another graduate student that just recently started here is Siouan. He's Lakota. So I've got a few contacts with Native Americans.
Have you seen a difference in the way those folks interpret these artifacts?
Or in the way that they think about them? Yeah, absolutely. A huge difference. And there's a historical issue there because not that long ago, Euro-American archaeologists were going out and digging their graves. And I mean that they were going out and digging people's grandparents up and putting them in museums. So they were being objectified in weird ways that Euro-American people were not, because they weren't digging Euro-American cemeteries. So we have there's a lot of bad blood there, understandably. And I think that's just starting to get repaired with the newer generations of some Native American archaeologists, like the ones I just mentioned. But they definitely have a very different, perspective on this stuff than we do, for very good reasons.
So beyond the technology part of it, and you've talked about it to some degree about the difference in the human density versus the animals and how the animals and the humans interact there. But are there any kind of like bigger, headier, like human? I mean, have you learned anything you think about humanity in general through this research?
Yeah, I definitely have. Just looking at hunting weapons, a lot of archaeologists have assumed that there's going to be a transition from simpler weapons to more complex weapons through time. And when we start looking really closely at the archaeological record, there's all sorts of examples where that's not the case at all. So the way people use technology, the way they associate themselves with their technology, or the way they use their technology to interact with the world around them, it's not necessarily, there's a lot to that. It's extremely complex. And we can't just assume that people are going to just grab or gravitate to whatever complex technology appears in front of them. So from that, knowing that, we're in a better position to look at ethnohistoric examples, like people in Tasmania, for instance. Not that long ago, archaeologists were saying these are an isolated remnant population of some like early, less advanced population, because they're using they have a very simple toolkit. When you actually look more closely at their toolkit and compare it with mainland Australian, native Australians, actually there's another number of examples of people on the mainland with similar, very simple toolkits. That was just what they needed. They had what they needed, and they relied more on their skill than on some complex tool that they had to build and then maintain. In the north of Australia, there were people with bows. They were in contact with islanders to the north of there that had bows, but they never adopted the bow. And in Polynesia, they fought with javelins. They had the bow, but it was just mainly a kid's toy, or for shooting rats. They mainly used javelins. So I guess if some of your audiences are hunters, we should really think about the assumptions that we have about hunting technology and what's good, and what really works. and what that means for people around the world, because some people are extremely effective with a very simple, minimal kit.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, like say with compound bows, right? There's this culture with compound bows where, I mean, there's a lot of people that every year they replace the bow they had the year before, right?
Right.
But I mean, even if you just go back like to the 80s, right? I was talking to someone about, do you remember the Fitzgeralds? Did you ever see them?
No.
It was like this father and son, and they still do it, man. They shoot compound, I think they're up in Michigan. They shoot compound bows, but they shoot them with fingers.
Okay.
And when they started making videos, like, I mean, they were those big, giant, crazy looking compounds, right?
Yeah.
And now you have these much more sleek Darth Vader looking things.
Right. Yeah. They're no longer really a bow. I mean, let's be honest. Those things look totally different.
Yeah, it is. I remember when I first started hunting, because I didn't start hunting until I was an adult, and I killed a whitetail, and I told my dad I did it with a bow, and whatever. Sometime later, my dad came down to visit me, and I showed it to him. He was like, "That's not a bow."
Yeah, what the hell is that?
Yeah, what is that thing, man?
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I guess what I'm getting to is that we have an inclination to always want like the newest and the best and the fanciest and the flashiest thing, but really I've found that most of the best hunters that I know are relying on those woodsmanship skills.
Yeah.
Right. Like I always say that, like trappers to me are some of the most impressive outdoors people, because I mean, and they're using a technology that is in many cases hundreds of years old, or at least 100. I guess when you're talking about like the conibears, I think the conibear came about in the 50s, but they have to figure out those animals. They have to figure out where that animal is going to put its front foot or its back foot, where it's going to enter, exit the water, all that kind of stuff. And that makes them much more effective than all the thermal imaging cameras and whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah. Compound bows nowadays, the newest ones that are being released are shooting arrows at over twice the velocity of traditional bows. And they have all those attachments. I don't know what those things are anymore. But going back to what you're saying, yeah, I mean, if one of the main benefits of hunting is that you build a relationship with these animals, with these prey animals, that you come to understand them really well, then I think, having more people try out the traditional weapons is a good thing. I bow hunt, love bow hunting. However, I will say that hunting is very challenging. Modern hunting out west, especially because the densities of hunters in Colorado is tremendously high. And we have densities that are over 12,000% higher than like the sawn I was referring to earlier during rifle season. And we have muzzleloader season that's right in the middle of bow season. So you have to be practical in some cases. And in some sense, during bow season, I'm out with a bow, and I'm trying really hard. I'm getting a better understanding, I feel, of elk and deer, how they use the landscape, their behaviors. But, if I want to put meat in the freezer later on, I won't hesitate to go out with a rifle as well. So,
are you hunting with a compound bow or like a recurve or?
Last year I was hunting with a replica Comanche bow. So probably about between 3 and 4 foot long Osage orange bow.
Yeah. Man, that's like, I'll be honest with you, that's exactly the answer I wanted to hear, man. That's awesome, man. And Osage orange would also be known as like hedge, or I'm surprised you're from Arkansas, man. You should call it Bodark.
Bodark, yeah. I got some of that French ancestry, so yeah.
What is like Bodark is a super traditional wood for duck calls as well, like turning duck calls, because it's so hard.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah,
I've got
some Bodark atlatls up there too.
Shit, I've got a Bodark duck call in the truck right now, man, that I turned on a lathe.
Perfect.
Do you are you personally are you put off by like compound bows and modern crossbows and stuff?
I think I'm more put off by modern muzzleloaders. I don't. So hunters go out.
This is a question I couldn't ask of most archaeologists because, like we were talking before, you have this really cool intersection of growing up hunting and still continuing to hunt, but you're looking at these, I don't know, not to say in a diminishing way, but these like antiquated technologies.
Yeah, and I mean, so two things there. First off, it takes a lot of skill to use them, and then second, the landscape has changed, and our relationship with prey animals has changed. And what that means is that not only is it that hunters go out, having worked a job all week and then they have just a couple days to hunt a weekend, and maybe they've only got 2 or 3 weekends to hunt in some cases, but they're also going out onto a landscape where it's more challenging to be effective, to be successful. So no, I don't see people with compound bows and think, what has the guy got in his hand? No, it's fine. I mean, people want to be out there. They want to hunt. They want to be effective, and that is all completely understandable. I do think, though, that we should be a little bit more conscious about. So one thing that bugs me is the semantic shift that's occurring now, where when people say bow, they mean a compound bow, and when they say, and then you have to say something like primitive bow or
trad bow or
so to me, weapons can evolve to the point that they're something different, and we've seen that we distinguish between muzzleloaders and modern rifles, and it's getting to the point now where compound bows are so different from a bow that I think we need to start thinking about them differently.
You think they should have a new name? Floopy floops. That's what we're going to call them. Floopy floops. You're all hunting whitetail with floopy floops.
That's fine. And I mean, I don't want to get too hung up on it. If people keep referring to them as bows, that's fine. But I do think that we should be, thinking these things through a little bit. Is it really that we just want the next best thing, and that we want these weapons to evolve into something completely different, and that we want bow hunting to be, or bow season to be, with a weapon that has a trajectory that's really not all that diminished relative to a rifle.
Folks are getting out there with, I mean, they're shooting 80 yards and stuff now.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that, what I just said, because I think that people what they're after is something that they feel comfortable with and that they can be confident in. And that's something that you can draw back, that you can hold back and aim, and using an aiming apparatus, know its trajectory, and that is going to have a very high velocity. And that, to me, is very similar to how we use rifles. Original bows, how people were hunting with bows in the past, is quite a bit different. The Comanche bow that I hunt with now has these short little arrows. It has flared nocks on the arrows. And when you grab the arrow, you grab it by that nock, you lay it on the bow, and you put that nock right up against the string, not looking at the string. A lot of people line it up just right, put that nock right there on. They're looking at the bow, and then they're looking back up at whatever they're going to shoot. No, you just grab the nock, put it on there. It's right up against the string. Draw it back to under your chin and release it. And you're not drawing it back and holding it back. That's not what you do with a wood bow, especially.
So you're not gap shooting. Bows. You're like instinctive shooting that bow.
Instinctive shooting, and if there's anything analogous to aiming a rifle, it's when you have that bow up before you even start drawing back the arrow. So the functionality is very different, and you have to be close with that weapon. People if people are going to start back using more traditional equipment, I think that the interest is there. It is growing. They need to understand that they're going out with a weapon that does limit their range, and they need to practice at a lot of different positions, to replicate something like hunting where you may be crouching or whatever when you shoot, and you're going to need to limit yourself to shooting within a set distance, something like 20 yards or so, to be effective. Otherwise, you start running a greater risk that you're going to hit the animal but not be able to retrieve it.
Man, that kind of brings me to maybe one of my concluding points here, and that is, how do you think that the way that you're approaching your research, which I assume you intend to be delving into this stuff, for the rest of your career. How do you think that the way that you approach it is different from somebody, as Autumn, your wife, said, she called them, archaeologists that look at their navels, yeah. Right? That have never gone out in a hunting situation,
right? Or armchair archaeologists, armchair anthropologists. There's a tradition of armchair anthropologists going way back. They're just sitting in an armchair theorizing about people, and it's hugely beneficial to get a practical experience with, if you're studying ancient hunters. There's a famous archaeologist from Wyoming. I was telling you about him earlier, George Frizen, who grew up hunting. He grew up ranching and hunting in the Bighorn Mountains, then became an archaeologist, and in his famous book, Survival by Hunting, he says archaeologists who study hunters should hunt. And I think, too, archaeologists who study ancient weapons or the remnants of them, mainly like projectile points, should try and use them and should get a sense of actually how they work. Because this isn't a lost technology. We've managed to recreate this. We're human beings, just like human beings in the past, and we can figure out how to make and use a weapon that was built by and for human beings. So yeah, doing this, like making the weapons, trying them, practicing with them constantly, going hunting, is just hugely beneficial for archaeologists. Yeah.
And folks could actually use these technologies now, like not everywhere. You actually had an experience where you tried to petition the state of Colorado to allow atlatl hunting, and that ultimately didn't work out. But there are, I know for sure, like my home state of Missouri, it's a legal way to hunt. There's other places where it is as well. And then with these like traditional or self bows or primitive bows, whatever you want to call them, as long as they meet the poundage requirements that's legal for the state you're in, those are legal methods of hunting. Now, you do need to check, because not every state will allow you to hunt with a napped arrowhead.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Quite a few of them will.
Yeah, you need to look closely at the regs, because I think in Arkansas you can actually use, they don't specify the material of the armature or the broadhead, so you could use a napped point. We can't in Colorado. It has to be steel.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, check the regs closely, and of course, if you're trying this stuff, you're building weapons to go hunt with, just make sure they're effective. Make sure that you can launch a dart both accurately and with good velocity, and it's going to penetrate. And same with the arrow.
Yeah, especially so if you're going down the road of using some horn bow and a napped arrowhead, just out of the practicality out of hunting optics, I would hope that you would really put the work in on the front end of that, to be doing something that was super ethical. Well, Devin, man, I know you said you're focusing on writing magazine articles and stuff right now. Hopefully one day down the line there'll be a book. You've got a website, you've got an Instagram. Like, what's the best way for people to find you and follow the work you're doing?
Yeah, I think the website is particularly good for me. I haven't been doing a lot with Instagram lately, just so busy trying to publish research. But the website basketmakeratlatl.com. Basket maker is the type of atlatl used in the Southwest that I really like. We've got a lot of information there. I'm going to try and do an article about some of the efficacy stuff I've done. So that's a good one.
Okay, and then can people find you on Instagram, or do you not really want them to?
Oh, you can. Yeah, ar.atlatl. That's my Instagram handle.
That's like I told you. That's where I found you, and I was following you for like a year before your brother mentioned something about being related to you, and I was like, oh, really? Well, also, man, again, thank you so much for letting me come to your house after dark here on a Sunday.
Absolutely.
Thank you for my first can of mead.
Yeah.
We've been enjoying throughout this podcast. It helped get me in the mood to talk about ancient stuff. And thank you, folks, for listening. Until next time. Folks, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Black Duck Revival Podcast. As always, it's produced by me, Jonathan Wilkins, and Brian Sachs. I'm stoked to finally be back home after about 5 weeks of travel. I made it through Turkey Tour, a total of 6 turkeys, 3 different species. That would be Rios, Easterns, and Miriams. I need to count up how many miles and how many states, but it was a ton of traveling. I got to see a ton of this country and hang out with just top-notch people, have fantastic conversations, have unbelievable meals, and really get to do some cool adventuring around this country. If you've been following along with that, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast and sharing it with your friends. Please continue to do that. If you have not done so, please subscribe on whatever platform you like listening on. Leave a 5-star review, a written review. All those things are tremendously helpful. Check out the website. That's blackduckrevival.com, or follow along on social media. Instagram is what I'm most active on, and that's just Black Duck Revival as a tag. I'm starting to book something a little bit different for this next hunting season, which is where I can come to you. So, a lot of folks don't necessarily have the time or inclination, or I guess want to come to Arkansas, or maybe the price of a class is a little bit prohibitive for just them. But maybe you've got a duck club or a deer lease or a hunting situation there where you live with your friends and family, and you want me to come out and hang out, hunt for a weekend. We can do animal processing and butchering. We'll do cooking demos and cooking classes. I also have the ability that way to kind of really laser focus on what you and yours are find most valuable and what sort of information would be most useful to you. And we can kind of tailor make a class that fits you and the way you hunt and the people you like hunting with. So please, if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me just through the website there, or you can send me a DM on Instagram. And please keep listening. Please keep sharing. We'll talk to you next time.